What is reverb? How is it created? How is it emulated in our computers? And what are the main parameters that you can find in the reverb? In this video, I wanted to challenge myself by trying to explain everything you need to know about reverb in 5 minutes. Before we start, make sure you hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you're the first one to know every time I release new videos on music production. Here we go. So first, what is reverb? Reverb, short for reverberation, is a sonic phenomenon that occurs when sound waves reflect off surfaces and create a series of echoes. To illustrate, envision being in an empty hall and clapping your hands. The initial clap produces a direct sound, but the sound waves also bounce off the walls, floor, and ceiling, creating a complex pattern of reflections. The resulting blend of this direct sound and these reflections is what we perceive as reverb. In simple terms, reverb is what makes the sound feel like it exists within a physical space, whether it's a small room, for example, your bedroom, or a cathedral. In the realm of music production, reverb is a crucial tool. It can transform a lifeless sound into one that feels rich and immersive. Imagine a singer performing in a studio. Without reverb, the vocals might sound flat and disconnected. Introducing reverb can simulate the acoustics of different environments, giving the impression that the performance is taking place in a specific space. But reverb can also be used creatively to enhance the emotional impact of a song, making listeners feel like they are part of a unique experience. In the field of music mixing, reverb can also be used to create depth within your mix, which can be useful to put some elements quite far from the listener and others closer. As you understand, reverb is physically a quite simple phenomenon, but it's an amazingly powerful tool in the world of music production. Now the question is, if you want to implement reverb in your music production process, how can you do that? There are actually 4 types of reverb creation in music production. The first type of reverb, which is the most usual, is the algorithmic reverb. Algorithmic reverb is generated by mathematical algorithms to simulate the natural reverb of physical spaces. It is highly versatile, offering a wide range of parameters to control decay time, pre-delay, or diffusion, for example, but we'll talk about it later. The second type of reverb, a bit more complex, is the convolution reverb. Convolution reverb captures the actual reverberation of real spaces by using impulse responses. It actually records the sonic fingerprint of a space and applies it to the audio signal, creating a realistic and natural sounding reverb. The next one is the electromechanical reverb. This category includes reverb devices that use a combination of electrical and mechanical components to produce reverb. In other words, through this type of device, the electrical signal is converted into mechanical vibrations and then converted back to an electrical signal that will be sent back to your mixer or computer. And the last one is the natural reverb. You simply put a speaker in a specific room, you put a pair of microphones that you record through your interface, and you get your reverb. But if you're just starting out in music production, chances are you will only use algorithmic reverbs at first. Why? Because the others are either expensive or difficult to set up, or both. But what's important to know about algorithmic reverbs is that they can emulate the last 2 types of reverb I just mentioned. So in a typical reverb plugin, you will find 5 types of reverb. Hall reverbs, which emulate the reverb of large concert halls. Room reverbs, based on the same principle but with smaller rooms and therefore shorter reverb times. Chamber reverbs, which can be associated with the natural type of reverb we talked about earlier. And finally, we have our 2 electromechanical reverb types, which are plate reverbs, which use a large plate to create the vibration and hence the reverb, and spring reverbs, which use the same principle but with a spring, giving the reverb a much more distinctive tone. Now it's time to talk about the anatomy of a reverb. In other words, what are the main parameters that you can find in a usual reverb? The first one, and probably the most important one, is the decay time. Decay time, also known as reverb time, determines how long it takes for the reverb to fade away after the initial sound. A longer decay time creates a more spacious reverb. Another essential parameter is the pre-delay. Pre-delay is the time delay between the original sound and the onset of the reverb. Increasing pre-delay creates a sense of distance between the direct sound and the reverb. Keep this in mind. The longer the pre-delay, the closer the direct source will look like. In a usual reverb tool, you will also find the parameter diffusion. Diffusion controls how quickly the reflections of the sound disperse in the reverb space. Higher diffusion values result in a smoother and more evenly spread reverb. You can also find the parameter early reflections. Early reflections simulate simulate the initial reflections of sound in a physical space before the onset of dense reverb. Adjusting this parameter influences the perception of room size and character. Another classic parameter is damping. Damping controls the high and low frequency content of the reverb. Higher damping reduces the high frequencies, resulting in a warmer sound, while lower damping allows more high frequencies for brighter reverb. And finally, we have the parameter mix or dry-wet that will simply allow you to adjust the balance between the dry and wet signal. You might find other parameters in some plugins, but these are the most essential ones that you need to know if you want to use reverb in your music. And that's it. That was all you need to know about reverb in 5 minutes. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you drop your like and subscribe to my channel, because next week I'm gonna talk about how to use reverb on vocals like a pro and through a simple step-by-step process. See you next week. Bye-bye.